There's a lot more people here than there was last year. I have seen so many more people just in their element this time.
We're going to talk about something super important, what it means to be transgender.
A curriculum that teaches public school students across Canada to celebrate the homosexual lifestyle and that gender is fluid.
In recent decades, the political landscape of Western nations has experienced significant shifts. Society in general seems to be turning more and more left-wing and progressive. This trend is evident in various aspects of public life, from policy decisions to cultural norms. Progressive ideals have gained traction in areas such as social justice, environmental policies, and economic reforms. Media, educational institutions, and popular culture increasingly reflect and promote these values, influencing public opinion and shaping the attitudes of the younger generations. And then, on the other side, we have the opposition, the brave and noble conservatives, who seek to protect and conserve traditional values from the evil progressives who want to disregard it all. And yet, despite all this, they have all completely failed. And it doesn't take a PhD in political science to recognize that conservatism in the West is in a state of crisis. The left-wing parties, in every case, are the winners, always laughing while the conservatives cry quietly in a corner. Some leftists might think this is an exaggeration, but their preferred parties have rarely left power in the last century, pushing aside their conservative rivals with relative ease. In fact, not a single conservative party has had a parliamentary majority for many years. Even the most ambitious and determined conservatives of recent years, like Donald Trump, have failed to make any significant impact. And if one would examine his official GOP program, it will become evident that it is even less radical than his 2016 program. It really seems like no matter what happens, the progressives always advance, conservatives sometimes manage to slow down this process, but the overall direction remains unchanged, and they end up having to make concessions and tone down their more ambitious goals. And naturally, due to this, many young people who are dissatisfied with the liberal progressive status quo generally do not identify with mainstream conservative parties, viewing them as completely ineffective who don't dare take the step necessary to actually bring about the change they desire. So now, the million-dollar question is, why do conservatives always lose? Is it because leftists are generally smarter? Are the evil globalists burning money to keep the true freedom-loving patriots down? Or does this generally lie in the strategies adopted by conservatives, as well as some of their core beliefs? I want to emphasize that this video isn't about conservatives in general. At the end of the day, I myself am a conservative. Rather, I am specifically talking about the mainstream conservatism espoused by numerous parties like the British Tories, American Republicans, German CDU, and so forth. Or, as I like to say, liberal conservatism. This is the brand of conservatism I am focusing on. I acknowledge that there are many conservatives who are just as disillusioned with mainstream conservatism as me, and they will be the victim of my ruthless critique. So when I just say conservative, keep in mind that I am referring to the mainstream conservatives unless stated otherwise, so that there may not be any confusion. The hard truth is that the general leftward shift of modern politics isn't the only reason for conservatism's constant defeats. Conservatives themselves share the blame for their losses. The issue lies more in the core beliefs of conservatism than in liberal and progressive dominance. Conservatism enables the success of liberalism, and sometimes when conservatism wins, it ends up turning into liberalism. That is why many people in the United States say that the two parties, despite apparently being rivals, in the end feel as if they are the same. I will outline the fundamental flaws in the doctrines of conservatism and their strategies that make them as dangerous to the progressive status quo as a mouse is to a cat. If you pay close attention to the developments of conservative parties, you will notice a very key pattern that they all share, a pattern that inevitably leads them to lose over and over again. I like to call this the conservative death cycle, as it keeps going on as the years go by and society advances. The cycle consists of three phases: fear of change, lack of answers, and finally it ends with hopelessness. If we follow these three phases from start to finish and take a closer look at them, it becomes pretty clear why conservatives are doomed to fail no matter what. The whole point of conservatism is to preserve something, as the name implies. Whether it is tradition, social norm, religion, and so forth, that is what makes conservatives, well, conservatives. And their rivals are the progressives who do not care much about conservation and seek to advance society consistently forwards. But the issue here is that this kind of conservatism that conservatives strive for is inherently necrophilic and is the wrong approach. The reason conservatives prefer preservation and are suspicious of youth and innovation is their fear of change. Conservatives favor order, stability, and predictable results over experiments. The saying, "if it ain't broke, don't fix it," is one of their favorites for a very good reason. This mindset has its advantages, like requiring less effort and supporting long-term planning, reducing the likelihood of crisis situations. This approach definitely works in a status quo when there are no real threats to conservative power, but when you are competing for power with several other political forces, this approach will sooner put your efforts in the grave than give you an advantage. Now, what do I mean by experiments? Some of my viewers may call me hypocritical since this is an approach I criticized in another video, but that was more about revolutionary change where the entire fabric of society is uprooted and replaced with something entirely new. In this case, what I mean by experiments is not daring to utilize new innovations and strategies to further your cause, like for example social media. In the beginning, conservatives have mistrusted it and generally decided to ignore it, while their rivals have utilized it to further their political goals. And this is exactly the problem. Conservatism often goes hand in hand with old age because it typically lacks a youthful, innovative spirit. As people get older, they lose their taste for excitement. Their bodies and minds become less flexible and they have less energy. This makes it harder for them to handle intense situations and sudden changes. While it's common for people to become more conservative as they age, this isn't something to be proud of necessarily. It's important to keep a youthful mindset and delay the aging process. When something is described as old, it often means it's become dull or boring. People naturally, especially young people, crave variety, but conservatives resist change, which causes them to age more quickly. This brings us to the next stage, lack of answers. Conservatives' fear of change highlights their lack of creativity. Creativity means breaking patterns, making surprising connections, and being unpredictable. Change confuses conservatives because they don't know how to respond. When change inevitably happens, they usually react slowly and focus on symptoms rather than causes. Fear initially drives conservatives, but it eventually paralyzes them. Much to conservatives' frustration, the world is always evolving, and the gap between generations widens. No tradition is eternal. Our traditions will also end one day. The real question isn't about protecting tradition from modernity, but about how we can adapt and shape it to fit current material and societal conditions. Traditional conservatives like me understand that tradition means evolution. As long as it avoids stagnation, it can continue to inspire those who engage with it. For example, a revived traditional West will endure until its tradition either self-destructs or is replaced. As long as our people remain creative and generate new metaphysical ideas when the old ones fade, we will continue to thrive and shape our own destiny. Conservatives, on the other hand, lack creativity and often seek answers in the past. They go beyond learning from history, avoiding risks and distrusting new things and innovations. They see the present as merely an extension of the past. This is different from left-wingers and traditionalists. For left-wingers, the present is an obstacle to the future, while for traditionalists like myself, it's a fleeting moment between what was and what will be. Conservatives want to preserve the past and often mistake tradition for mere conservation, forgetting that tradition requires renewal, not just preservation. Conservatives are comfortable with what is dead, embalmed and artificially sustained. Both progressives and conservatives are fixated on the past. Conservatives lament its loss, while left-wingers complain it doesn't disappear quickly enough. One side is necrophiliac, the other is murderous. Both are preoccupied with death. Traditionalism, in contrast, views life as a cycle of birth, growth, maturity, death, and renewal. Don't get me wrong, dead things can be interesting and even seem exotic, especially if they're old. With the right mindset and creativity, they can be used and still seem relevant, allowing people to look back on their traditions with pride. But conservatives preserve things not out of genuine respect for tradition, but because they want a static world. Slow, safe, comfortable with predictable outcomes. Such an existence can be pleasant under ideal conditions, as I mentioned before, but it's not exciting. Excitement comes from change and conflict, which conservatives fear and try to avoid. And this inevitably leads to conservatives being inherently boring. Think for a moment, have any mainstream conservative parties done anything unique and exciting that they are remembered for? Yeah, I didn't think so. The only recent example I can think of from the top of my head is Donald Trump and this whole personality cult he built around himself and the MAGA movement. Trump very carefully and skillfully crafted this image of a lone man against the corrupt establishment, and that he is the only one who can save them. Thus, any sort of attack on Trump could be interpreted as an attack by the deep state, which just further boosts his popularity. While we may mock Trump for this and find it ludicrous, you can't deny that it is effective and made Trump into the man we know today. It is unique and exciting, to say the least, an approach many other Republicans dare not take. Or, in Germany, the Alternative for Germany party was a key part in spearheading the so-called Stolzmonat movement online, where in June, for Pride Month, Germans used the German flag to showcase their German pride, a pushback against the LGBTQ, and one candidate even started using Wojaks and Pepe the Frog for his political campaign. Something as of now, completely unheard of. This is the kind of innovative and exciting approach I am referring to, and naturally many young Germans who identify with the right are flocking to the AfD as it grows more and more popular among young people. And today, the younger generation is spearheading it through memes and other unique and creative approaches. The CDU, the mainstream German Conservative Party, has done absolutely nothing unique and exciting to this extent, and most people forget that it is even relevant. And as I mentioned, this has made them completely boring and unattractive to a younger demographic that is eager to express themselves politically. And then we come to the last and final stage, hopelessness. The focus on the past, resistance to change, and distrust of new things eventually make conservatives irrelevant, particularly in a world that values progress and constant innovation. Because of this, conservatives become political relics. Instead of exercising power and guiding people, they become like museum tour guides. And then, sooner or later, their refusal to adapt until they become irrelevant leads to conservatives constantly lagging behind. Filled with angry misunderstanding and frustration, they start to resent the world. To survive, they must either surrender to the left or come to terms with them, earning their reputation as hopeless losers in constant retreat. And in order to stay relevant, they forcefully, quote-unquote, adapt to some principles of the progressives that in the current year are seen as not too progressive anymore. And they just manage to stay on that, quote-unquote, conservative side. Take LGBTQ issues as an example. 10 or so years ago, the majority of conservatives would not support them, and nowadays, since they were forced to adapt, they are complaining about pride parades on Twitter, how they have been hijacked and gone woke. There's a good reason why memes like these are circulating around, because this is just a natural conclusion of mainstream conservatives. They will always stay one step behind the progressives on any issue, and then advocate for that exact progressive policy 10 or so years later, instead of firmly standing their ground and developing new strategies to sell their beliefs in the material and societal conditions, for reasons I've already highlighted. But there is one more crucial thing that nails the final nail in the coffin of conservatism. It is this famous libertarian motto we are all familiar with: I just want to be left alone. It is this mentality that to some degree all conservative parties share that deliver the killing blow. Why, you may ask? This position fundamentally puts conservatives in a defensive position for all eternity, but their enemies, the liberal progressives and woke mob, are always on the offensive. Their aim is to make their views the norm and force it onto others by any means necessary. Basically, their aim is to win, but conservatives just want to be left alone. They only become active when they need to eliminate threats to their peaceful lives. Otherwise, they are among the last to take initiative because, you know, being a pioneer means facing risk, stress, and uncertainty. Therefore, conservatism is a constant defensive movement against a never-ending flood. And after a wave of liberalization, conservatism just gives its citizens time to prepare for the next wave. They focus on holding their current positions and, if they retreat, they quickly fortify the next position. Once they lose a position, it is hard to regain it, and they achieve only partial success. They don't dare go on the offensive. They don't dare to give the progressives a taste of their own medicine, and that is why they will lose. And the only weapon they have is pointing out their hypocrisy, like the world-famous line, "Imagine if the roles were reversed." But they don't realize that their enemy doesn't follow the same principles as them. They could give less of a shit if they are seen as hypocrites, because again, their aim is to win no matter what. The key to victory here isn't to dismantle state power so you could be left alone more. The left will just find another way whether you like it or not. The key is to use it against them, the same way they use it against you. There is either total victory or total defeat. It is the cold Machiavellian truth many conservatives dare not think about. Remember, the side that wants to win will always beat the side that just wants to be left alone. The way I see it, if we want to win this war, it's time for us to move away from mainstream conservatism. For the longest time, it has been nothing more than controlled opposition on the side of liberalism, lacking the initiative to do what needs to be done. Let the old parties fade into irrelevance, as young right-wingers take initiative and lead a new, more sophisticated fight against those conservatives always saw as their rivals. But the most crucial step here is to avoid conservative thinking or being the reaction. Conservatives define themselves by what they oppose, which traps them in endless cycles of conflict and opposition. Currently, many of the terms we use to describe our political positions are negative and oppositional, often starting with the prefix anti. The problem with this mindset is that it is defined by what it opposes rather than what it supports, and its success makes it tied to the great enemy, and if that enemy falls, you will fall alongside with it.